Time for another video, and before we get started, a big thank you and shout out once again to everyone who has liked and subscribed so far. This is a channel dedicated to helping others improve as artists in the most efficient manner possible by leveraging the research of neuroscience, meta-learning, and autodidacticism. I know I said my next video would be about the books I use and a deep dive into them, and that video is underway, but in the meantime I recently passed my first 100 hours of painting and drawing, which I share here on YouTube as daily shorts, and so I thought it might be good to produce a bit of a shorter video to briefly show you what 100 hours of drawing and painting physically looks like, as well as the key lessons I have learned so far. This video won't be covering painting, only drawing, and the reason for that is just that I've spent the vast majority of this first 100 hours drawing, and so while I can think of paint-related lessons I have learned, I want to wait until I have a bit more experience before sharing those with you. The next thing to know is that all 100 of these hours were produced working from cards in the Anki decks I have made, and each session was 1 hour in length. I'll break this down as they apply to the skill pillars I work when drawing at the moment, which are form and technical skill. This is something that the main two books I have been using really drove home. That would be How to Draw by Robertson and Drawing Form and Pose by Tom Fox. Everything we draw must be in XYZ Space, meaning it works in 3D perspective. No drawing flat shapes here. Every line you draw should be aimed at an imaginary point in space, and you think of the paper as a 3D volume you are drawing into, like a sculptor. The biggest lesson here, particularly when working on anatomy, is that if everything fits inside a box, which it does, you will only ever be able to see 1 to 3 sides of it. For example, if the box is head-on, we see it as a square. If we rotate either the box or our viewpoint relative to it, we might now see 2 sides, each receding into perspective. Change it again, and we can now see 3 sides, but we can never see more than 3. This helps us because whenever we draw, say, a head, we can consider before drawing it how far rotated it is and whether we are above or below it, as well as whether or not it is tilted relative to us. Can we see under the chin? Well, then we'll not be drawing the top of the head. When drawing from life, you can quickly check the head as if it were a cube and figure out which planes are visible. This little consideration of eye level and perspective alignment is very much at the forefront of my attention when drawing for these first 100 hours, and I see no sign of that ever changing. To make it easier to learn, I've been drawing shapes in 2D, then aligning them in 3D so that we can break an object down into 3 sectional planes. We can then connect up the silhouette of each plane, and we have a convincing object in 3D. This works for anything you could ever want to draw, especially from imagination, and there is no shame in planning a drawing this way to help you wrap your brain around how the form of something works. In fact, I suspect it is the key to being able to remember how to draw things from imagination. Another thing that really is almost like a drawing hack, should any exist, is simply overlapping things. By just drawing one object behind another, the brain just accepts that this must be 3D space, and so indicating overlap in your drawings is very useful and should be done wherever it is appropriate. I will even now sometimes change a reference pose slightly to make the overlap more apparent. Overlap can be with big forms like arms in front of legs, but also in your silhouettes, like the way one muscle is sitting in front of another and how they wrap together under the skin. This is something that's hard to indicate with line and no value, but a little nicked line of overlap tricks our brains into understanding it. Overlap can sometimes be confusing though, so treat it as a secret spice to be used in the right context where it will help and not hinder the understanding of form for the viewer. Finally, I can see the importance of not including too much information in your drawings. We do not need to see every muscle or every mechanical detail, and indeed the art is more interesting when you leave the detail out. I'll talk about this more in a future video because I now believe there is a whole sliding scale of simplification, and a lot of your drawing style will be dictated by the level of simplicity your drawings express. This does not mean that we do not understand the form and all its exquisite detail, just that we understand it and choose to simplify it, expressing it in far less detailed terms when drawing. This makes it more of a suggestion of the form than an accurate depiction of the form itself. Go look at your fave paintings or drawings and you will suddenly be awakened to how prolifically this is used in good art. Let's talk about the technical skill pillar and how my actual skill with drawing tools has evolved in these first 100 hours. When I write, I hold a pen wrong. Using that term annoys me, as there should be no correct way to hold a pen, you would assume, but I remember in my early school years the teachers telling me off because I held a pen like this. They used to put a triangular sleeve over the pen to make me hold it more like this. But eventually one teacher said, "You know what bro, you do you," or words to that effect, and so this is how I write. The issue is, it's also how I draw. When you grip the pen that close to the business end, it means your line control will be very precise, but sometimes that precision does not help the drawing. As a result, I've been trying to hold the pen or pencil in a manner I normally do finger-wise, but further up the barrel. This means I do not have as much control over the lines, although I am getting better at it. I notice it's something that Kim Jung-gi does, which is why I thought I would try it, and so far it's been an interesting experiment. It definitely adds a slightly shaky, more fluid quality to the line work, and I think I prefer that over trying to be super precise and making sure every line is executed perfectly. One other thing it highlighted though was how different pens and paper work together. I like to draw in ballpoint pen, and for most of these 100 hours I've been using different brands of ballpoint pen on layout paper. Layout paper is cheap, low quality paper and it's slightly see-through. It's designed for rapid sketching and then overlaying a fresh sheet on top to redefine the sketch underneath. The problem with ballpoint pens is that they can skid on the surface, which is not always great for drawing. Also, the ballpoint pens can drop a big glob of ink at random moments and ruin the line. Scott Robertson mentions this issue in his book, and so copying him I use a tissue or cotton rag to wipe the nib of the pen occasionally. Closer to the end of these first 100 hours I switched to a fine liner, having just tried one because it was to hand and I actually preferred the way it works. You see, holding the pen further up the barrel makes it skid more because I have less control, and it's just too much with ballpoint, at least on smooth papers. But the fine liner must have slightly more friction because it skids less, and it strikes a better balance between precision and fluidity and line quality when holding the pen further up the barrel. If I switch to a toothier paper, I expect the ballpoint pen would work better, so I'll experiment with that at some point in the future too. I burned through 2 A3 layout pads, one side only in the first 100 hours, as well as getting most of the way through an A4 sized regular paper drawing pad. Having high quality paper and pens is important for doing a good job, and I feel it's worth experimenting with a variety to see what you have the best results with. Other tools I've used include this Pilot G-Tech pen, which creates a very precise line, but it's also very thin, and it makes for quite weak lines, as well as this Pentel Fude brush pen, which you have to squeeze slightly to load with a set amount of ink. If you squeeze it a lot, it floods the paper. You can also let the ink run out to produce very dry brush style marks. If you have any drawing tools or paper brands you recommend, I'd love to hear them so that I can try them out, so please let me know in the comments. There's one more interesting lesson I have learned that is outside of the skill pillars, and it really relates to my own self-awareness and how I choose to train every day. I typically train for 1 hour a day, and each session focuses on usually a single idea as defined by the card I am studying. I would typically train whatever quality a card would emphasize, such as simplicity or XYZ Space. However, I've recently found good opportunities to combine my focus. This is something that's only really come into my awareness during the latter part of these 100 hours, and so I'm assuming that my brain has figured out how to spin multiple plates at once. What do I mean by that? Well, you may be familiar with my Ronaldo analogy, where I say that he's so good at dribbling a football that during a game, he can forget about doing it and focus on things going on around him. A noob at football would spend so much time worrying about keeping the ball at their feet that they would not be able to concentrate on anything else, and in the early stages of learning to draw, this is what I have experienced. I was worrying about keeping the lines as singular, non-scratchy marks and trying to spin all these other plates at the same time, like being fluid and rhythmic, and also keeping the lines tight, and having strong anatomy and perspective, and quite frankly, something has to give. You will not be able to do all of these things at once as a beginner when drawing. It takes a while to really internalize a quality, but then you can add it to the drawing session without having to worry about it consciously. As a result, I can now draw anatomy while being really conscious of, say, the XYZ aspect of what I'm doing, and when an opportunity to indicate overlap appears, I see it like an opening in a football or boxing match. Instead of having to dedicate an entire session to a single quality, I can work multiple qualities at once, and I feel this is something you see the far more experienced artists that you admire doing when they draw. Everything is in there as a reflex, just doing its thing. The perspective is correct, the anatomy is well understood, and so they can draw fluidly and rhythmically and create really wonderful pieces of art. I obviously still have a long way to go, but I've gained an appreciation of how this idea of spinning multiple plates will become easier over time, and I look forward to seeing how that idea progresses with my experience. Hopefully you can see that I have improved at least a little over these first 100 hours, and even if the work does not show it that much, mentally my understanding is way further along than it was back in December when I started doing this. At some point I'll produce a video covering this in more detail, but there are so-called noob gains happening here. When starting a new skill or learning undertaking, you make the most progress in the earliest phase. As I get more into this, I'll have to work harder to break new ground and avoid plateauing. But I'll be in this noob phase for a while, and so I'll be enjoying big leaps in knowledge and understanding. I hope the main thing you take away from this video is the self-awareness I have when I'm drawing. I notice how my body and ability and focus changes over time, and I document it. That's what meta-learning is all about, learning how you personally learn so that you can create experiments and explore what works and what doesn't. The other thing to note is that I'm not working specific techniques, but focusing on more abstract, generic principles and qualities. I do not really care much about head anatomy right now, but rather, can I draw a box in perspective well? I have to walk before I can run, and you're far better off training these broad, generic qualities so they can be applied to all your future art. Do your foundational work and then get more specific. Thanks for watching, hopefully there was something useful to you in there. I'll be back soon with my video on art books, and so I'll hopefully see you then.